No show in American television history made quite the same cultural mark as Soul Train. For over 3 decades, it brought music, dance, and black culture into living rooms across the country. But in 2006, something happened that changed everything. The show disappeared from the airwaves without warning, without a proper goodbye, and without any real explanation. All that remained was whispered talk about a final episode that was recorded but never shown to the public. The question everyone wanted answered was simple: what actually happened behind those closed studio doors? To understand the ending, we need to go back to where it all started. Don Cornelius came into the world in 1936 on the south side of Chicago, growing up in an America where racial segregation shaped every part of daily life. Before he ever stepped in front of a camera, Cornelius worked regular jobs that had nothing to do with entertainment. He directed traffic, worked in sales, and did what he needed to do to get by. But in 1966, everything shifted when he decided to take a short broadcasting course. That decision led to a job as a reporter at WCU's AV, a local station in Chicago where he would eventually plant the seeds for something revolutionary. It was at that Chicago station where Cornelius came up with the idea for Soul Train. He envisioned a music program specifically created for the black community, a show that would celebrate their culture, their music, and their style. On August 17, 1970, the first episode of Soul Train aired in Chicago. Right from the beginning, the show stood out. It featured live performances with local dancers moving to the music and guest musicians performing their latest hits. The response was immediate and powerful. People loved what they were seeing because it felt real and authentic. Just over a year later, on October 2, 1971, Soul Train went national. Major companies like Sears and Johnson Products Company saw the value in what Cornelius had created and put their money behind it. The show exploded into a nationwide phenomenon. With its infectious music, bold fashion choices, and signature dance moves, Soul Train became something special on television. During what many consider its golden era, the show brought in an incredible lineup of musical legends. Artists like James Brown, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, Michael Jackson, and the Jackson 5 all performed on that famous stage. Later, artists like LL Cool J and Mary J. Blige would continue that tradition. But Soul Train was more than just a stage for singers. The show launched entire careers for dancers who would go on to make their own mark on entertainment. Rosie Perez got her start there, as did Jody Watley, Clinton Gent, and Jeffrey Daniel. Daniel would later join the group Shalimar and even teach Michael Jackson how to do the moonwalk. These were regular people who got their big break by dancing on Soul Train, and their lives were never the same afterward. One of the most memorable parts of any Soul Train episode was the Soul Train line. This segment became iconic in its own right. Dancers would form 2 rows facing each other, creating an aisle down the middle. One by one, dancers would step into that center space and show off their best moves while everyone else clapped and cheered them on. It was more than just entertainment for viewers at home. The Soul Train line was about personal expression, about showing the world who you were through how you moved. People developed their own signature styles, their own unique ways of stepping into that line. For many dancers, that moment in the spotlight could genuinely change the course of their lives. Don Cornelius was never just the friendly face who introduced the acts. He served as the executive producer, the editor, and the creative mind controlling every aspect of the show's identity. His personality defined Soul Train in many ways. He was calm, refined, and serious in his approach. While other music shows might have been loud and chaotic, Soul Train had a certain dignity to it, and that came directly from Cornelius. He believed deeply that television should not belong to just one group of people. He felt that all cultures deserved to see themselves represented on screen in ways that were truthful and positive, not stereotyped or demeaning. Over the course of more than 30 years, Soul Train aired over 1,000 episodes, making it the longest-running music television program of its era. At its peak in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the show regularly pulled in ratings between 4.5 and 5.0, which were impressive numbers. For companies selling fashion and cosmetics to black consumers, Soul Train was the perfect place to advertise. The show became central to mainstream cultural life in America, reaching beyond the Black community to influence style and music across all demographics. The Soul Train brand expanded beyond just the weekly television show. There were Soul Train music awards, fashion events, and all kinds of merchandise. Don Cornelius himself became recognized as one of the most influential figures in Black entertainment. In 1971, Life magazine even named him one of the 100 most important Americans. Everything seemed to be going perfectly, but success often brings its own set of problems. When something becomes as culturally important as Soul Train had become, the pressures and conflicts behind the scenes can grow enormous. Don Cornelius had always run a tight ship. He controlled not just what aired on television, but also how dancers looked, what they wore, and how they moved on camera. Rosie Perez, who danced on the show for several seasons, later shared that Cornelius did not allow moves he considered too suggestive or anything that strayed from his vision of what the show should be. She remembered being told to change her performance style because Cornelius felt it was distorting the show's artistic direction. This kind of control was part of how Cornelius maintained the show's identity, but it also created friction. Another issue that came to light years later was about payment. Many of the dancers who appeared on Soul Train never received any money for their performances. The opportunity to appear on national television was considered payment enough. For someone trying to break into the entertainment industry, being seen by millions of viewers was indeed valuable. But as time went on, some of those former dancers began to feel that they had been exploited. The show had used their creativity, their youth, and their talent without offering proper compensation. They had helped make Soul Train what it was, but they never saw financial benefits from that success. The biggest conflict, though, came down to music itself. By the late 1980s, hip-hop was rising as a dominant force in American culture. Young people were connecting with rap music in ways that felt fresh and exciting. But Don Cornelius had reservations about the genre. He believed that hip-hop portrayed too many negative aspects of the Black community. The language, the imagery of violence, the attitudes expressed in many rap songs troubled him deeply. In a 1992 interview, Cornelius stated directly that he did not want his show taken over by sounds that he felt represented nothing positive. This position immediately created divide. Many artists and music producers argued that Cornelius had lost touch with what was happening in music and culture. New programs like Yo MTV Raps and Rhapsody on Bet quickly stepped in to fill the space that Soul Train was leaving empty. Major rap artists such as Tupac Shakur, Nas, and Snoop Dogg rarely appeared on Soul Train, if they appeared at all. Young viewers who wanted to see hip-hop culture represented on television started watching those other shows instead. Soul Train was beginning to seem outdated and out of touch with contemporary music. The impact on viewership was clear and measurable. While the show had maintained ratings above 4.0 throughout the early 1980s, by the early 2000s, those numbers had dropped below 2.0. Local television stations that had faithfully aired Soul Train for years began moving it to less desirable time slots or replacing it entirely with programs that seemed more relevant to current audiences. The show was losing its place in American television. In 1993, Don Cornelius made the difficult decision to step down as host after 23 years of being the face of Soul Train. New hosts took over, including Mistro Clark, Shimmer Moore, and Dorian Gregory. Each brought their own energy and style to the role, but none of them could recreate what Cornelius had brought to the show. His calm presence and the symbolic authority he carried were unique and irreplaceable. The show tried to adapt by changing hosts, redesigning the set, and bringing in more hip-hop artists, but these efforts felt like temporary fixes rather than real solutions to deeper problems. Between 2003 and 2006, production began to wind down. Fewer episodes were being made each season, and the team behind the show was falling apart. Longtime editors resigned and moved on to other projects. Technical staff found work elsewhere. The costs of producing the show kept rising while the content itself felt increasingly dated. Investors began questioning whether Soul Train was still worth the investment. As for Don Cornelius, he gradually withdrew from public appearances and stopped commenting on the show's status. What had once been his greatest achievement now seemed to exist only in memory. Soul Train kept airing on a weekly basis, but it was no longer the cultural force it had been. Younger artists looked for different stages to perform on. New dancers came and went without making much of an impact. The program had entered what felt like a permanent state of decline. Then something happened in 2006 that would end everything. During what should have been a routine taping session, something went wrong. The details were never made fully public, but from that moment forward, Soul Train never appeared on television again. In March 2006, Soul Train set up for what appeared to be just another episode during its final season. On paper, nothing about this taping seemed unusual, but according to people who were there that day, the atmosphere felt wrong from the very beginning, and the production crew had been changed at the last minute, creating confusion about roles and responsibilities. The guest list was disorganized, and there seemed to be no clear leadership guiding the production. Some sources later claimed that Don Cornelius was backstage, even though he no longer had an active role in making the show. Staff members who had worked with him for years said he was visibly disappointed with the direction the program had taken. The episode was supposed to feature a rising hip-hop artist, but things started going wrong before the cameras even started rolling. The taping began nearly an hour late because of disputes between the artist's representatives and the production team. Then, a former staff member later revealed that the actual performance crossed boundaries that Soul Train had always maintained. The visual elements, the choreography, and the costumes were all deemed incompatible with the show's original vision. This was exactly the kind of content that Cornelius had always tried to keep off his show. The situation escalated quickly. Cornelius reportedly demanded that the entire editing process be stopped and called an emergency meeting with the companies that distributed Soul Train to television stations across the country. One of the major distributors, Tribune Entertainment, withdrew their support shortly after that meeting. Without Tribune Entertainment, Soul Train lost the network it needed to continue broadcasting nationally. Within 3 weeks of that fateful taping, more than 40% of local stations had stopped airing the show. No formal announcement was ever made declaring that Soul Train was canceled. The production schedule was simply marked as indefinitely postponed. The official website stopped being updated. Television networks quietly replaced Soul Train's time slot with other programming. People within the industry understood what had happened, even if the general public remained confused. That episode, taped in March 2006, was effectively the final episode, though it never aired and likely never will. After the taping, several media reports began referencing this buried episode as the primary reason the show ended. Though it was never officially broadcast, footage from that day remained in the possession of several former staff members. Online fan communities began discussing the incident, referring to it as a cursed performance. The controversial episode did more than just disrupt a single taping. It marked the silent end of one of the most important television programs in American history. The immediate aftermath was marked by silence. Don Cornelius refused all interview requests following the incident. In a brief radio appearance in 2007, he offered only a cryptic statement, saying he thought the show had gone far enough. After that, he withdrew almost completely from public life. Many believed he felt betrayed by the way the show had evolved beyond his control, steered by new people and directions he could not recognize or accept. The people who had been part of Soul Train began sharing their perspectives. Rosie Perez called the show's sudden end an unnamed sadness. Dorian Gregory, who had hosted during the final years, admitted that no one on the production team received clear communication about what was happening. Many realized the show was over only when the internal taping schedule disappeared from their work systems. They showed up one day expecting to make another episode and found out there would be no more episodes to make. Independent media outlets started investigating what had really happened. A 2008 article in Vibe magazine stated that Soul Train was not canceled because of ratings, but because trust within the organization had fallen apart. The Soul Train Music Awards, which had been running annually since 1987, continued for a while, but they were separated from the original television program's brand. Even though Don Cornelius had created the awards, control was handed over to Bet in 2009. The ceremonies that followed adopted a more modern style and rarely mentioned the show's golden years, which only deepened the sense of loss among longtime fans. Meanwhile, something interesting was happening online. Digital platforms, especially YouTube, became repositories for Soul Train's history. Old VHS recordings and performance clips from the 1970s and 1980s were uploaded and began attracting millions of views. A new generation of fans emerged, mostly younger people who had never watched Soul Train during its original run. They discovered the show's music, fashion, and classic performance style through these archived videos. However, the final years, those turbulent times in the 2000s, remained largely undiscussed and unexplored. What could not be ignored was the string of personal troubles that followed Don Cornelius after the show ended. In 2008, he was arrested on domestic violence charges, though he did not go to jail. Then in 2012, tragedy struck when Cornelius died by suicide at his home in Los Angeles. He left behind numerous unanswered questions about his life and about Soul Train's end. The Los Angeles Times wrote in a memorial piece that although Cornelius had been a trailblazer, he had exited the main stage in the quietest way possible. After his death, television historians began looking at Soul Train's entire journey with fresh eyes. Some called it a fragmented legacy, a story without a proper ending. Others believed the show had fulfilled its historical role and that its quiet ending was simply the natural course of things. But the 2006 shutdown remained shrouded in mystery. Some observers started calling it the Soul Train curse, a phrase that was more symbolic than literal. Yet when looking at what happened to many people who had been part of the show, from dancers to its founder, the sense of an uneasy ending felt real. The emotional toll seemed to weigh heavily on many former staff members even years later. Despite its quiet ending, Soul Train's legacy continued to shape culture. Nearly 2 decades after disappearing from television, the show has not faded away. Instead, it has become the subject of revival in various forms. In 2019, Bet produced a biographical drama series called American Soul, starring Cinqua Walls as Don Cornelius. The series portrayed the show's early days and the challenges of creating black entertainment in a television industry dominated by white executives. While some parts were dramatized for television, the series explored tensions that the general public had never known about. Though it did not directly address the 2006 taping, American Soul captured the intense pressures behind the show's glamorous surface. Museums and cultural exhibitions have also embraced Soul Train as an important part of American history. The Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture now displays various artifacts from the show, including original costumes that were worn on air. During academic panels, researchers have argued that Soul Train should be considered a cultural asset worthy of preservation, comparable to Motown or the social art movements of the 1960s and 1970s. YouTube has become a hub for collective memory around Soul Train. Thousands of performance videos, behind-the-scenes clips, and interview segments have been reconstructed and uploaded, some from personal archives and others from local television stations. Young people born after 2000 who never experienced the show firsthand have become a new generation keeping its spirit alive. They study the choreography, recreate the fashion, and host themed parties inspired by the Soul Train line. On social media, hashtags like the Soul Train Challenge went viral in 2021. Young artists including Lizzo, Anderson .Paak, and HER participated by posting videos of themselves dancing in the show's classic style. Some groups organized costume competitions themed around 1970s fashion to honor what Soul Train represented. The show, once at risk of being forgotten, has been rediscovered as an endless source of inspiration. From a historical perspective, many scholars are calling for a complete restoration of the entire series from 1971 to 2006. Some tapes, especially from the early years, have been digitally remastered and made available on streaming platforms. However, the final seasons remain largely untouched. That last episode from 2006, though never destroyed, has still never been released to the public. Many believe it will never be officially published because of legal complications and content sensitivities that remain unresolved. The legacy that Don Cornelius left behind is no longer measured by how many episodes aired or how high the ratings climbed. Instead, his legacy is measured by how Soul Train defined what a music program could be. It was not just entertainment, it was a cultural declaration. Soul Train was the first place where Black Americans saw themselves on national television in their own clothes, dancing their own dances, playing their own music. That representation was a form of power, especially during an era in the early 1970s when racial segregation still marked American society. The abrupt silence of 2006 could not erase what Soul Train had accomplished. If anything, it turned the show into an interrupted icon, and that incompleteness fuels the public's ongoing desire for answers. What remains is more than just performance footage stored in archives. It is a shared memory that spans generations. For the people who danced to Curtis Mayfield's music, who sat in front of their televisions on Saturday afternoons believing there was a place on screen where Black dreams were allowed to exist and flourish, Soul Train represented something profound and irreplaceable. Though the show ended nearly 20 years ago, the values it represented remain vivid in memory and in popular culture. The unaired episode may forever stay in the shadows, never to be seen by the public. But the light that Don Cornelius ignited continues to spread through new generations, discovering what Soul Train meant and what it still means. That light represents more than the legacy of a television program. It stands as a statement of identity, voice, and presence for a community that had too often been overlooked and underrepresented. Sometimes what never aired, what remains hidden and mysterious, is exactly what history remembers most strongly, and what continues to capture our imagination decades later.